Hi everyone, thanks for joining. So this is a special IG Live that I'm doing with Sarie Taylor, and for those of you who've been following me for a while, you might have seen me do live IGs with Sarie before. I'm sure most of you know me. I'm the hormone doc. I'm a medical hormone specialist and medical consultant. And Sarie Taylor is an anxiety coach, and she's an absolute whiz and expert in problem solving and everything to do with anxiety. So many of my patients with hormone problems suffer from anxiety. That's younger women who have cyclical hormone problems, several different conditions, and also women in perimenopause and menopause. So I'm just waiting for Sarie to join, and then we'll get started. Hopefully we might be able to answer some of your questions. If you want to put questions on in comments during this session. I think Sarie has collected some questions from her followers too, so we can go over questions, because really what we want to do is do troubleshooting, problem solving, answering questions. International Women's Day is a great day to do it because we want to celebrate women and everything about women, and we want to keep everybody strong. And I think anxiety is a common problem. So I've just seen that Sarie has joined, so I'm going to see if I can do the live and then we can kick off. So Sarie, hopefully.
Yeah,
here we
go. I didn't think it was going to let me in then. It was taking ages. Hi.
Hello. Oh, welcome, and thank you for joining today. It's always, I love my life with you. I always learn loads from you, and
same with you. Same with you.
So yeah, no, maybe I didn't let you join quickly enough. I was just doing an introduction and I probably didn't spot you joined. Anyway, you're here. I've introduced you as Mrs. Anxiety, meaning you know everything about it. And so
Mrs. Anxiety without anxiety anymore. Woohoo.
Exactly. No, queen of problem solving with anxiety. And how are you?
I'm good. Yeah, I'm just plodding on. Still quite sick from a pregnancy and still a little bit in shock. Very hormonal, if you like. But I'm all right. Yeah, I'm doing all right. To be expected.
Yeah. Okay, well, so I guess, have you had any specific questions from your...
I've had a few questions. Some are kind of around the same thing, which I get asked every time I'm going to be live with you, or we even mention hormones and anxiety. This question always comes up. So I've got one there. And then also, there was another one about PMT symptoms that I was asked. Oh, people are saying congratulations, thanks. I'm 43, 44 this year, and it was not in the master plan, but hey ho, we get sent in different directions, don't we? So yeah. So the one that everybody kind of always asks, if you like, is this age-old question: how do I know if my anxiety is hormone related or whether it's just anxiety? Like, how do I know the difference? And this is so common, and it's not just with hormones, it's with any kind of physical symptoms we have, is that people really struggle with this idea of, I suppose, needing to know what's going on, if you like.
And I saw somebody had written a post recently, and you commented, and I thought it was really insightful comment, in that it was a post about symptoms of perimenopause. Mm-hmm. And all the symptoms were really non-specific: anxiety, fatigue, brain fog, lots of symptoms, palpitations. And you pointed out quite rightly that these are symptoms that can be purely due to anxiety as well. Yeah. So yeah, it can be really difficult. And so, I mean, from the hormone perspective, hormone changes, fluctuations, particularly when they're disjointed, when they're imbalanced, for sure, they can bring out anxiety symptoms. So I think probably almost every woman on the planet, and if you haven't had this, you're pretty lucky, when you go into that few days before your period, particularly if you're perhaps going through a lot of stress as well, so it's often that perfect storm, women can feel more anxious and have lots and lots of symptoms. But quite often when you're in your mid-cycle, when your estrogen level's really high, anxiety seems to be sort of disappear or lessen.
Yeah.
But equally, women can have anxiety in pregnancy when their estrogen levels are super high. Many women do have anxiety when they're on the pill, when their hormone level sort of clamped at a particular level. So the relationship is not binary. It's not sort of high estrogen good, low estrogen bad. It's more complicated than that, and it's obviously multiple other factors. So I guess one side of things is if your symptoms are very related to changes in your hormones, obviously that can be looked at. But I think for everyone, whether it's hormone related or not, there are anxiety solutions that we can all try and implement, which is where you come in to try and help the symptoms. Understanding the symptoms is good, and then solutions.
Understanding is everything, actually. Understanding and awareness, because I think I've shared with you before, Annice, that when I was severely anxious and was having anxiety, episodes all the time on and off and lots of panic attacks, my periods were awful. Like, I would be so much worse around my period because, yes, for me, the way and this is like very layman's terms, obviously not medical terms, but for me, it's like so much is going on in your body. And if you are someone that is in the throes of overthinking and being hypervigilant, then we're going to notice the slightest little physiological changes. And the potential there is for people to then fixate on it. What is it? Is it because of this? Is it because of that? And yet, as my relationship with anxiety has changed over the years and I don't suffer in that way, my periods are totally different. Now, they're not plain sailing. I do get a bit of PMT. I get moody. My patience isn't quite there. I'm tired, constantly yawning. There's all of that. It's been a while now since I've had a period, but all of that for me now is just an indication, okay, you're hormonal, slow down. Empty your diary if you can. Go to bed earlier. Take better care of yourself. So what I do now is I give myself huge permission. Even throughout this pregnancy, I can feel a difference in my hormones when my daughter is in her cycle. I can still feel my cyclical as it would be a little bit, even without my periods. So again, it's like, okay, it's more about acceptance for me. It's okay, my body's really, there's something going on at the moment. I don't need to fully understand that to not overthink it and to not overwhelm myself with it. And I think in some ways, again, what pregnancy interestingly has taught me or reminded me is it's almost like a condensed version of life, like the roller coaster and ups and downs. Hormonally, I feel so intense and so kind of constantly changing and evolving, and then you get to this next week and something else is going on and then something else. But the reason I suppose, if you like, not fearful of it and it's not escalating into masses of anxiety and panic for me is because I know what it is. It's kind of to be expected. But all that really then boils down to, again, is us letting ourselves off the hook and realizing, actually, if we're having a hormonal shift, whether that be our cycle, perimenopause, whatever it is, for me, it is a love letter from the body saying, slow down, we're busy. We're busy at the moment. For me at the minute, we're busy creating a human. When we're having our period, we're busy ovulating. We're busy, the body is trying to say, we've got some really important stuff to do here as part of human nature. And it's phenomenal. It amazes me. And that is an indication for us to slow down our expectations mentally and psychologically, because we can't, someone say we can't continue at the same pace. We can, but should we really be? Like, why can't we take these as opportunities to slow down?
But I think also when you do have that acceptance and make those small changes, funnily enough, because a lot of those terrible symptoms become less, you function better. So you can actually end up sometimes doing more. So you raised really beautiful points there. Switching hypervigilance to acceptance, and that's, what sometimes women think I'm talking about when I say acceptance of symptoms. They go, what, I've got to just accept that I don't feel great. And that is not what
No.
it's about.
No.
Accept about letting these things happen, letting them come. And I think the key, and this is really relevant for the periods and the hormone related symptoms in relation to premenstrual syndrome and perimenopause, is that if you are hypervigilant and you're on high alert, your stress hormones are high, and stress hormones trump healthy hormones. So it becomes sort of more complicated. It's a web, because it's not just about the drop in your estrogen at the time before your period's going to start, or if you're perimenopausal, your fluctuations. It's about the impact of the cortisol and the stress hormones really making, swaying production of hormone away from estrogen and into cortisol, which I'm simplifying it. It's not as simple as, oh, estrogen just goes into cortisol. It's more complex than that, but it can itself worsen the whole problem with the irregular periods, the fluctuating symptoms, and cortisol makes your mood lower. So it's like almost a bit like a sort of self-fulfilling prophecy in a way, in that things, the more you overthink it, the more your stress hormones go up, the worse the anxiety can get, the worse the symptoms can be. Somebody just asked a question, so I'll quickly answer it because I'll forget otherwise. They said, can your estrogen level jump from, I can't remember what level they said, but quite low level to very high level on changing an HRT preparation? And I'll just answer that. It's unlikely to, if it's a similar level of preparation. It's more likely that if you're in perimenopause, that your own ovaries have suddenly woken up a bit and produced a bit of estrogen, because the ovaries can wake up and go to sleep during perimenopause quite a lot. So I'll answer that question. But anyway, sorry, that's
that's fine. Yeah, so it's that, and I think again, it's, when you were saying before about this, and people will sometimes jump to the conclusion when you say it's about acceptance rather than, for me it's like acceptance rather than resistance. It's not acceptance of feeling terrible and suffering. So when I say to people about acceptance of what is with anxiety, that's not saying you suffer for the rest of your life. It's about saying it's accepting what it is to be a human being, and seeing ourselves as a human being rather than a machine that should be consistently well oiled, and that we, people beat themselves up for getting into a cycle of overthinking and then feeling anxious. It's like, that's the most counterproductive thing ever, because that's the time where you need to be showing yourself the most love and compassion possible, rather than beating yourself up for having ended up in a cycle. Because let's face it, we all end up there at some point. And a huge part of it for me is understanding and awareness. And again, I know I've mentioned pregnancy, but obviously because I am, but I even find the response from people around me so different. Everyone's letting me off the hook from life at the moment. People can't do enough for me. Oh, go and have a nap, you're growing a human, you should. And yet for me, okay, we can't spend our whole life napping, but actually, even when I'm not pregnant and I'm hormonal, I'm really good now at going, I'm going to have an afternoon nap, like I'm tired, and listening to my body, not just when I get permission from myself and everyone around me. It's like, actually, it's made me consider even more, like, why are we not giving ourselves this permission all the time when we feel sensitive or changes are going on?
But I think it's highly relevant to it being International Women's Day today, because this is a woman problem as well. I mean, I'm not saying no men overthink and no men beat themselves up and overburden themselves with too much commitment, etc. However, it's much, much more common that women do that. And I think because we're working, because we're having kids later, obviously, we've got so many challenges. We've often got elderly parents. We're all connected because of social media. So you do end up with more commitments. And I think women take on a lot more, than the basics, than men do in general. I don't like to make sweeping statements. And I know that there are many men who are very overcommitted as well. And I know men can get anxiety as well. But I think that women being overburdened, it's almost like you're close to that level where the straw breaks the camel's back, both in terms of hormone fluctuations in younger women and in perimenopause, that you've just got so much on that the stress factor is there, sort of exacerbating everything. And if you're highly stressed, I presume, and I presume you would agree, that your anxiety can overflow much more if you've if you just don't have downtime.
You can go from 0 to 100 very, very quickly because you're already hypervigilant, and it like comes in layers. And I think, and again, I will hear people very often say things like, well, when I stop, I'm worse. I just keep going. It's like, you're going to have to stop at some point, because if you don't, your body's going to stop you. And whether that be physiologically with things being imbalanced, or mentally where you just can't face the world anymore, your body's going to do that, because that's survival and that's what it's built to do. So we can kid ourselves that if we just keep being productive and continue without a break, that, you know, we don't stop long enough to feel the anxiety, it will catch up, because the body isn't, we're not actually really built to be so overstimulated all the time.
No, we're not. We're absolutely not. And it's that sort of chronic stress level. It's no downtime. And I think sometimes people say they feel worse when they stop. And that's because they stop when they feel worse. You know, they actually crash, as opposed to, oh, I'm going to stop now, I feel worse. It's actually because they've had to stop and they're feeling worse, and that's why they've ended up stopping. So there's many symptoms of anxiety, and we talked about this. They can sound like hormone symptoms, but they can be, you know, anxiety. So there are many different symptoms, and I know my patients will, I've talked to you about this before, often the symptoms get worse at night. Yep. And with hormones, often women will say, I get palpitations in the middle of the night. My mind is racing, and then I'm wide awake. And of course, if you're perimenopausal, or if your estrogen's low at the wrong time of the month, you might be sweating as well. So you're lying there in a sweat with your mind racing and palpitations. Yeah. And I think we've spoken before, and you can, I mean, I think it's really just useful for you to talk about this, because I know I'll say, what do you do in the moment? And you'll say, you know, prevent it happening. But why don't you just go how you navigate, for example, it's almost like a panic attack at night, or an episode which is probably obviously a panic attack in everybody, but it can just be that waking up, mind racing, palpitations, wide awake, in a, you know, lying in a bed of sort of sweat and thinking, this is no fun. So how do you know?
So often what people want to do is, when they've got, like you said, you've just anticipated to a degree, is that the thing to be mindful of is, once you're already lying there with your heart racing and sweating and feeling that feeling of dread that is hard to explain, that sort of comes up through your stomach, and that awful feeling, you're already in it. No amount of you can't think your way to well-being. You can't think your way to feeling better. That's the key thing. But people don't realize that. So what they do is they go, oh, I've got all these physical symptoms. How do I get out of it? What do I need to do right now? And they go over, is it my hormones? Is it this that I did? Is it that? What if I'm like this tomorrow? And all that's doing is keeping that cycle going for longer. When we're in it, we've already set the alarm off. We've already triggered the body to start producing the adrenaline and stuff. We're already in it. And the key is really about, again, increasing people's understanding so that they can sit with that discomfort for a little longer without going into problem solving mode. Because actually the adrenaline does rid itself quite quickly when left alone. It's the reproducing of it constantly and consistently trying to figure it out that creates the problem.
This is something we've discussed before, because the half-life of adrenaline is very, very short.
It's quick.
In fact, when it's going on for ages, it's because your limbic system is telling your adrenals, it's fight or flight mode, keep producing the adrenaline. And it shouldn't. If you just kind of stop, it can settle down, eventually settle down.
It will always settle down, but it's reminding yourself, and I know it's much easier said than done, but it's reminding yourself, there is nothing for me to do in this moment. It's like setting off a fire alarm and then wishing you hadn't set it off. That's not going to stop it. It's going to stop when it stops. It's not, there's nothing for us to do in that moment. We've already set. I always say it's a bit like asking someone to do a really important job for you, and then them doing it and saying, oh, well, I wish you'd not done that now, I've changed my mind. Our body is doing a really important job when we set off that alarm. Yes, we're misusing it and it feels rubbish, but actually it's showing us our body's doing exactly what we're asking it to do. And once it's done it, it's done it. So it's more about recognizing, okay, so my body has responded to my worries and my anxieties and my thoughts, and it set the alarm off. That is going to stop, but I just need to leave it be. Let the body process whatever's going on in there, let it do its thing, and it will settle. It's when we don't leave it alone. And I used to have panic attacks that would last days, weeks, sometimes felt like months, but that's because I was just sending a message constantly to that part of my brain going, oh, well, now you've got this other symptom to worry about. Now you're sweating. Now you're wide awake. Now,
I was going to ask you about that. And I know I've spoken to you about this before, but I think a lot of the audience might not have heard that discussion. So in my patients with hormone symptoms, or they might think that their symptoms are related directly to maybe a low estrogen, or, problems with their progesterone or something like that, because there are so many different symptoms. And again, going back to what you'd said before, these are often non-specific symptoms, and they can just come from all sorts of different reasons. Now, you told a very nice story to me once before, which was about how you had many, many different symptoms. And this can happen, and it happens to a lot of my patients, in that you can end up in A&E with the palpitations and you're having your heart checked out and different things. Mm-hmm. And you told me a story about, I think it was a nurse who saw you in A&E after, a number of times of ending up in A&E. Will you share that story?
Yeah, I'm trying to think I can't remember in what context I'd shared it, but I think
you'd had, and they kept searching for some serious.
Had ECGs, I'd had every check going, and I get why they do it, because some of it's reassurance. Like, she's young, she's complaining of heart pain, chest pains, all of this. They need to check. But I was consistently getting checked, and the more I didn't have answers or didn't feel like I had answers, the more I worried. And then what would happen is, and the body's really clever, because again, the physical symptoms are alarms, are warning signs from the body to say your thinking is off on a tangent, like you're setting off this alarm to say you're in danger. And if we continuously ignore them and still keep telling our brain we're in danger, the body's going to change those symptoms. It's phenomenal. It's going to go, okay, she's not listening to that. We'll give her a headache instead. Okay, she's not listening to the headache. How about a bit of tingling? The body will actually change the symptoms if we don't listen. So my symptoms were constantly changing. I was constantly looking outside of myself for an answer. I was convinced there was something wrong with me. And it was actually a male nurse, and I'll never forget him. And I always wish I'd gone back and thanked him, but I never did. That, I was sat in a room with my mum, and I'd had all the tests, and I was just literally sat there going, I'm going away again with no answers, and I'm petrified that I'm going to feel terrible again in the night. And he just, first of all, said, can I talk to you on your own without your mum? So he took me into a little room, and he just said to me, I think you've got anxiety and depression, and I think that's what your symptoms are. And I just instantly burst into tears, because I knew deep down, actually, that I was in part doing this to myself, that I'd had all the checks and was told many, many times there was physically nothing wrong with me. And yet it sort of took someone to be brave enough to say something to me that might be uncomfortable, but from that moment on, that's when my acceptance started, that this is mental for me. This is something psychological that's happening. But that's a hard thing to accept, because in some ways it's easier to keep thinking it's because of my hormones, or it's because of this, and search for answers, because we feel like we're doing something to fix the problem, when actually there's not a problem as such. It's a misunderstanding of how our mind and our body are so connected, and the messages that we're consistently sending to our bodies.
So, and I will iterate to the audience that this was about 20 odd plus years ago, wasn't it, that this happened to you?
In my early 20s, yeah, and I did end up then being hospitalised for a month, which is another whole story. I shouldn't have been kept in hospital for a month. That wasn't helpful. But anyway, and yeah, just going from actually being really outgoing and seemingly confident to, in the space of 2 weeks, not leaving the house. And then getting all of these checks and ending up in this cycle. And then obviously over the years, I've understood more and more as things have gone along, and got to a place of contentment. But I've spent good 10 years searching for answers.
And I think part of this is because our current healthcare culture is all about very single system, very blinkered routes of health. So you've got a thyroid problem, your blood test should be abnormal, then you get treated you know, you've got, I don't know, a broken arm, you go and have it, you know, fixed. And that's what our current healthcare system is very good at. When people, and, you know, I see a lot of women, I do see men as well, but this is often, it occurs in everybody, but unfortunately women's hormones do seem to add another dimension in that men don't tend to have a problem with. But it's unexplained symptoms. And I've seen patients over many years, of all different ages, demographics, you know, from 16 years onwards, with unexplained symptoms. And quite often the question is it to do with hormones? Is it to do with stress hormones, female, male hormones? You know, is it thyroid related? And if there isn't a single clear-cut broken system there on the blood tests, you're often the doctors will just say to you, there's nothing wrong. So if you've got loads and loads of horrible symptoms, there's nothing worse than being told you're fine, you can go home and be happy, there's nothing wrong. And that's a real problem with the healthcare system, and I think that is starting to change. But unexplained symptoms often are down to that mind body, you know, continuum getting messed up. And hormones and anxiety are very much linked in terms of that, because if the hormones are a bit out of kilter, they might not be broken, it might not be an organ that's broken, like in many younger women with hormone symptoms, like in perimenopause, where the estrogen isn't always low but the symptoms are all over the place. It's difficult because there isn't a quick fix.
No, and I think logically unfortunately we've kind of taken on that culture of how the healthcare system is, and it is a very innocent misunderstanding. You know, I trained as a psychotherapist for 4 years and then went on to train in other areas, and not once throughout any of my training was I pointed to the fact that none of us are broken internally. That actually, yes, we may be misusing the system, we may be off balance, there may be areas in that we can improve our experience, but we're not lacking and we're not broken, and trusting in that our bodies will take care of themselves, and, you know, all of that stuff. Nobody ever talked about that, you know. And again, I get it, it's an innocent misunderstanding, but as a therapist it was like, let's focus. From the second you meet a person, we're thinking about treatment plan. To think about treatment plan, we have to think what's wrong with someone, rather than, you know, a lot of my work now is exploring with people the complete opposite direction of that. It's like, let's look at what is doing well. Let's look at, you know, showing people that they're not broken, and that there's not, nobody ever has to give up hope. I get so, and you probably have it similar with yours, that so many people will come to me and they believe that they're the exception. They're never going to get relief from really severe anxiety symptoms. You know, they've tried everything, and it's like, I've been there, I get that, but you are not an exception. You are a human being. And there'd just be a bit of a misunderstanding that you've not quite linked together yet, that will change everything. And it's not, because we're not broken.
So when I see my patients with hormone problems, and I'll often see women who are being given hormone treatments, and they're on their hormone treatment and they're still having symptoms. So you've got, you know, you're told it's perimenopause or menopause, you give an HRT, the symptoms are still there. Or in younger women, they might have been given antidepressants, they might have been given pill preparations, but those symptoms are still there. And as we discussed in the past, I'm very holistic, and I will always try and help women to do the things that help relieve stress, for example, because I think that helps overall with well-being, symptoms. So I talk about exercise and movement a lot. I talk about downtime and self-care, trying to clean up nutritional intake just by reducing junk food, increasing whole foods as much as possible. So, and I think those are really important, and I think they're important across the board for everything to do with hormones, and probably everything with a lot to do with mood. But clearly anxiety is a little bit different well, maybe you may say no, it's not, but if you're start to give advice to a patient who, for example, I've seen, who's got anxiety that's continuing despite they've been given, they're going, look, I'm on hormone treatment, and my symptoms, my anxiety is as bad as ever. And of course the environment we're in, the pandemic, war, all of these threats don't help. How do you advise people in that situation to change. So they're not in that moment of a panic attack. They're just going, look, I need to make some changes. What sort of changes do you know?
They need to increase their understanding and their awareness of how all of this works. So you're right in that diet helps, exercise helps. Of course it does. It's proven that these things help. However, I have worked with people whose diet and exercise is spot on and they're still anxious, because our mind, we can override any of that stuff through our thinking. It is so powerful that we can be doing all the things, yet if we still misunderstand. So for example, even with exercise, people can get to the point where if they think, oh, if I miss 2 days, I'm going to get anxious. And they probably will, because they're waiting for it. And the story is, if I don't exercise, I'm going to get anxious. And yet, you know, it's about getting to the point to understanding that our physical symptoms, our hormone fluctuations, pain, everything. I'm not saying it's not real, because it is, but everything is experienced through our thinking and through our perception, and there's no getting away from that. So if our thinking is contaminated and hypervigilant, like, that's going to add a layer of stress, pressure, inflammation in the body. It's going to have a knock-on effect, regardless of how we're eating or exercising. Again, you know, as I was saying, we forget how phenomenal the body is, and we want to take care of it, and it's great. But for example, in this pregnancy, my diet has been awful, because most things I just can't eat because of my sickness. And yet the midwives will just say, as long as you, every time we go, my husband will ask, I'm concerned because if she's not eating very much, blah, blah. And they say, as long as she's keeping down fluids, that baby will take what it needs from her. And that is how phenomenal the body is. Like, yes, look after it. But on the other side, if we don't understand that our thoughts are creating our experience in any given moment, including pain or anything physical, then that's almost like, for me, the missing link to, we can still suffer and be doing all the things if our mind runs away with us. I had a conversation with someone the other day. I did a reel on it because I just found it really interesting. I was someone that was putting music on from their mobile phone to the car, and they're going through a list of songs, and one of the songs had the words heart attack in the title or something in the song, and they said, oh, I wish I'd not seen that. Now I'm thinking, have I seen that because someone's going to have a heart attack? You know, I wish I'd not seen that now. It worries me. And my instant response was, if you'd have seen that song title and it had been called Winning the Lottery, would you have then obsessed over this idea that you might win and get really excited and feel fabulous? And they just said no. Said, no.
We're programmed bias, aren't we? We're programmed to be hypervigilant about the positives, not the positives. Positives ignored. Yeah.
Well, it's part of survival, but what's really empowering and changed everything for me was having more understanding of how all that works, to realize that any thought I have about anything, I can choose how I respond to that. I don't have to take that on board to mean something, because actually our thoughts don't mean anything. And most of the time it's in the future.
Well, yeah, and we do have that it is that instinctive negativity bias that we always, it's that catastrophizing, that always, well, what the worst case scenarios, which really bring on the stress response, the fight or flight response, the cortisol, and then the anxiety can go with that. I mean, it's at the moment,
it's a habit that we've formed. Like, part of it is, but then we keep it going.
I mean, I always say you've got your limbic system in the brain, which is your emotional sensing center, and it's constantly saying there's trouble coming, it's bad, and so when you're saying you need to be conscious and mindful about it, you're activating that frontal lobe, the logical brain, that's saying, actually, how are we now? We're fine at this moment in time. You're actually fine. You're not having a heart attack. You're not having this, but it's that terrible amygdala in the limbic system that's saying, no, it's all a disaster, it's terrible, it's awful, and yet there isn't a positive center in the brain that, apart from your neutral, sensible, logical mind, which is in your frontal lobes, there isn't an equivalent of the amygdala that's going, hey, everything's great all the time. It just doesn't happen. But it doesn't help when we've had a pandemic. I mean, a lot of women have really struggled and suffered in the pandemic, homeschooling, working from home, which is like living at work, doing all the extra chores, stress of what's going to happen. And then, the lockdown easing you know, we get some date where nobody has to do tests in case if they've got, and then we get war, and fear is there. And then I also have, I see women all of the time on social media who are fearful about being on HRT. For example, for my audience, there's a lot of women who are perimenopausal, menopausal, fearing HRT, fearing not being on HRT,
Yeah.
fearing.
But for me, that it's always, fear always comes back to me to, I always call it the 3 U's: unknown, uncertainty, and unpredictability. Are they really fearful of the HRT? It's probably more that they're fearful of what might or might not happen if they do or don't take it. I had someone in my membership recently that's been given HRT, and then she posted in the membership and said, I'm not going to take it now because I've just read the side effects. I'm like, oh, steer clear from the side effects. Like, if you read a paracetamol box,
yeah,
you will scare yourself, because again, society and, you know, policies and procedures mean that they have to be so thorough. But just because we have a thought that I might have that side effect doesn't mean it's true. We've got to, you know, I've been in a situation where I've had an allergic reaction to an antibiotic and gone to hospital. I was okay. It got resolved. Does that mean I'll never take an antibiotic again? No, because if I need it, and there's no guarantee that that will then happen again. And fear is about the what ifs in the future. And something that's really freeing and liberating is understanding that on more of a, we all get it on an intellectual level. But as you were saying before, if we're hormonal and it affects our mood, if our mood is lower, then our thinking is more contaminated. But again, even knowing that, so if I have a low day, and I've had some pretty low days in this pregnancy where I'm like, can't be bothered with anything, don't want to talk to anyone, but it doesn't scare me like it used to, because it's like, okay, I'm just going to make adjustments and allowances for myself, and I'm not going to, it's not scary, it's just my mood. Might be my hormones, might not, I don't know, I don't need to know, because what I do know is that the chances are I'll wake up in the morning and it will pass. Now, if I go to bed worrying about it, thinking, what if it is there tomorrow? Probably will be there tomorrow. So it's about becoming comfortable with the discomfort that sometimes our reality brings because of our thinking.
And I, you know, with that, you know, that scenario you've given with one of your memberships saying she's read the leaflet and she doesn't want to take the hormone treatment. A lot of people get a bit confused between side effects, which you may or may not get, and risks, which are generally much longer term, and you don't really need to worry about until if it actually gives you a side effect. Because if you get a side effect, you're not going to take it, and if you feel great with that new treatment, then you know you can worry about long-term side effects much later.
Yeah, one thing. Exactly.
So many people are fearful of so many things, and we just need to take that fear away. But it's how we do that, and as you say, it's all about that contaminated thinking and that negative bias. Or the only way to do it is to bring your frontal lobe in each time, isn't it? Which is difficult.
Understanding does. So for me, if now I've got that understanding on a level that it seems to have really sunk in for me, I can even be in a panic, but with a sort of knowing underneath, look, you're going to be okay. And I think that's where when we get to, because, you know, any of us could read a textbook and have an intellectual understanding, but where it seems to fail us is when we're in that low mood and thoughts contaminated and we feel like this is our reality. Whereas actually when we get a real true understanding of how this stuff works, we start to see, oh, okay, this is how it works. You know, and in terms of, like you say, of risk, the second we open our eyes, we're at risk. I think, is it like 80% of stuff happens at home? You know, the second we step outside the door, there's a whole new load of risks. And for me, it's about really, and it sounds dead simple, being more in the present. And actually the only guarantee we have is right now, but it also is partly in trusting that your body, so even a side effect to a medication is a love letter from your body saying, this might not agree with you. It's a warning. You're not just going to drop dead like that. You know, it's that. And we know there's always worst case scenarios we can pick out and go, well, that happened to that person. But that, again, is just our anxious mind searching for, we're looking for reassurance that we're never at any risk and that everything's going to be perfectly okay. It's a reassurance that none of us can ever have.
Yeah.
And actually, we don't need it to be okay.
And so I think with the anxiety and hormone side of things, we haven't talked about how hormones can help, obviously, But as you said, you can be pregnant, you can be on hormone treatments and still have the symptoms. So I think it's also really important to embrace the trying to balance that narrative in your mind when you are catastrophizing, having those sort of that negativity bias, the, you know, focusing very much on the negative thoughts, but also being proactive in what you can do. So the lifestyle side of things is really important. But as you say, you can still have anxiety with that. Yeah. Considering, you know, treating hormone problems. So I think in perimenopause, one problem that I see again and again at the moment is that women go to their GPs and they say, look, my anxiety has got worse in perimenopause and I feel like, you know, maybe I need some treatment. And they continuously get told if their periods are regular, they don't need treatment, which is a myth. So there are myths that I think women come up against. And I think if you're trying to do everything you can and your anxiety is getting worse, I think it's important for women to be able to say to the GP, look, I've got these symptoms, they're getting worse. I am 40 something, for example, or 50 something. They should, even if your periods are regular, your hormone fluctuations might still be being contributed to by if you've got anxiety, if you've got, and also other symptoms like sweating, aches and pains, fatigue. So periods being irregular isn't always, you know, you don't always have to have irregular periods or no periods to get anxiety related to low estrogen. So I think what needs to happen in relation to hormones and anxiety is for us to look at that whole picture, what we can do for ourselves, but also seeking help. I think there is still definitely a problem for women getting help from their doctors, which you know, I'm very much trying to support change for, in terms of, you know, GPs having better education on hormones, and it's not just perimenopause, it's younger women with hormone imbalances through their menstruation
also
as well.
Like with psychotherapy, if you go and meet a psychotherapist or a coach, like someone comes and works with me, and you know, one of the things I love about being on social media is they get the measure of me pretty quick before they work with me, and they know what they're getting and what my approach is like. Because I think it's important that actually, if you're going to a doctor and you feel that you're not happy or satisfied, we can go and speak to somebody else. Like, it's okay to go, even if you've had the same doctor for your whole life, it's okay to go and speak to somebody else. I think it's like, you know, it's important for us to know that we've got that power to go, actually, I want to speak to somebody else as well. And not in a way of like, they're terrible and wrong, but it's just that everybody, whether you're a doctor, a therapist, is always, again, going to be working through their perspective, their experience of life. And it's okay to go and get another opinion. And again, this thing about what are the symptoms, and is it anxiety? Is it hormones? Is it this? This is a bit of a bold statement, but I would guess that if we had this magic ability to press a button that told us, okay, these symptoms are menopause, and you're going to finish your menopause on this day in this year, and then you're going to go back to how you were previously, or the new version of you. I think people knowing that, half the people wouldn't turn up in your office. It's the unknown. It's the feeling out of control of like, what is happening? When's it going to stop? Is this going to go on forever? It's all of that that feeds the way that we feel. It's and again, that's what makes pregnancy easier. I know this is going to end in 9 months in total. So that gives me a little bit of reassurance on those down days. But I think because we don't know when we're going to be balanced again, or when perimenopause is going to finish, or menopause is going to finish, that's the bit that people, if they're really honest, struggle with. It's the not knowing.
Absolutely. And so and is it going to get worse before it gets better? I think a lot of women worry about.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think that's why, you know, seeking help with a doctor to see if there's anything that you can get help with directly is helpful. I totally agree with you. Search for solutions. I mean, the internet and social media is, you know, a tricky place, because you can often get people who are offering solutions when they're not really, you know, it might be an expensive solution and not such a great solution. But also looking at things that you can do for yourself. And I really advocate outside, you know, going outside and getting fresh air, for example, you know, getting sunlight and daylight exposure, because these are stress relievers. And a lot of us have chronic stress all the way through our life and don't have mean, you say you've learned over the years to allow yourself downtime. Women don't tend to do that in general, and many men don't. But going outside for a walk, getting some fresh air. I mean, most people feel better on holiday because they're out of their own, stressful.
It opens up your world, and when your thinking is contaminated and you feel like you're in this black hole with worry and anxiety and whatever's going on, the minute we step outside, we are opening up our world, and naturally our mood will shift, and therefore our thinking is less contaminated because we get a little bit of clarity in our thinking. We realize that it's not just us in here, it's actually, wow, we're one small part of something much more vast. And I think that can massively help. But the other thing is about permission, because when I used to get really anxious, I would go, I can't go out like this because I'm anxious. What if someone sees me, blah, blah, blah. Whereas now, again, for me, it's non-negotiable. Even if I feel sick, if I feel anxious, if I feel anything, I'm still going to go out because, quite frankly, in the nicest possible way, I don't care what people think. If I look like I've just been crying, or I look pale, or I look like, that's not important. What's important is that I take care of myself.
That's a tricky one for women, though, isn't it? A lot of women will say, I don't want to go out when I'm feeling, I don't feel like I look like I should go out, so therefore I won't go out. And so that those things, I think, are, I mean, how do women learn those lessons when everyone on social media looks perfect?
Well, everyone's the only thing that stops us is our thinking. It's our perception. And for all we know, there could be another woman out there that looks fantastic and glamorous and like she's got it all together, who may be absolutely dying inside. We don't know. And I think that's one of the gifts.
Well, we know that from lots of things in the media. We know that a lot of people who look great, actually behind the scenes, it's not the case at all. So I think that is another pressure for women today, when you kind of feel like you have to look perfect and everything should be perfect. And actually, when you see other people like that behind the scenes, it's not like that, but we still feel inadequate. You feel like you haven't.
It's so easy to get caught up in that. It's so easy, but again, remember, it's only a thought. It's not the truth. This thought that we look terrible isn't the truth. It's just a thought. And again, the more you understand about how thought works, the easier it is to ignore those thoughts as just thoughts. And I know it sounds simple. It is actually really simple, but it's so easy to resist it when we don't fully understand it. And it does get easier. The great thing is the more you understand it and your anxiety reduces, it just has a knock-on effect in other areas, like caring about what other people think and stuff like that. It just has a nice, gentle knock-on effect. But we don't get to a point, I'm not at a point where I never have anxious thoughts, where I never feel insecure. Of course I do, but it just doesn't stick around for very long because I just let it do its thing and then bugger off and let me get on with my life.
The other side of the coin is, if your anxiety is so high, you're feeling more exhausted, because it's exhausting having those constant thoughts. And I think with stress associated with that, many women will get carb cravings because of the effects on your metabolism from the cortisol that ultimately make you hungrier, because it's all to do with your protective mechanisms for war coming because there's stress, therefore, and then you crave carbohydrate, and then you beat yourself up because you've eaten a load of sugar. Because when you're craving carbohydrate, you're not going to go and eat an apple. You're going to go and eat something that's really probably quite high in sugar and fat, desirable. So I think women need to beat themselves up less. Take more.
One of the things I always say is remove the word should. Remove the word should from your vocabulary. We don't need it. It's rubbish. That's all based on our past experience or what we believe might happen in the future. There is no such thing as should. We don't need to use that. And again, one thing that used to help me in the early days was when I would find myself getting ahead of myself, like, what am I going to be like next week? What if it gets worse next month? I used to dread Christmas, certain times of the year, all of that. And I would just gently remind myself, right at this very moment, am I okay? And you know what? 99.9% of the time, the answer was yes, I'm okay. And just try and stay with that. Not an hour from now, not how am I going to sleep tonight? It's 6:20 in the evening, and I wouldn't even consider how I'm going to sleep tonight, because that's way in the future. So it's that sort of being gentle and being kinder to yourself. And again, as parents particularly, say, well, I've got to do this for my children, I've got to do that. The best gift you can give your children is a more present, chilled parent, and teach them that it's okay to go nap. It's okay to say to them, I want peace and to be on my own for half an hour. It's okay to say to them, I've not done this or I've not done that. I'm not feeling great. That's a gift that you can give your children. And yet we're so often taught that, you know, that's us showing weakness and vulnerability and not being adequate. It's the opposite. It's the opposite. To show them that they can do the same for themselves.
But also you need your downtime and your self-care, because to be everything to everyone, you have to look after yourself as well. Because if you're not looking after yourself, you can't be that person to everybody as well. So I think it's
this is a bit morbid, but sometimes when I get really caught up in something, I think to myself, if I was on my deathbed now, am I going to give a shit about this? And the answer is usually no. So, like, is it really that important? It's like,
most things are not, are they? Most things we worry about. You know, I hear people say, you know, think about if you're worrying about a problem, just think, are you likely to be worried about this in a year? And if the answer is no, then it's not worth worrying about now, actually. So, even, I mean, of course, there are things.
Yeah, and even look now with the war, and I get it, and I really understand why people are fearful, but, you know, not long ago, the biggest thing was COVID. Like, we were so concerned about what's going to happen, and yet now it shifts. There is always going to be something for us to worry about. As human beings, it is nature. How we respond to that is up to us.
Absolutely, that resilience. I'm conscious about the time, because if we go over time, we lose the thing. But yeah, absolutely, that resilience. And also the other thing about worrying about things like the pandemic and the war is that it's beyond our control. So worry it's meant to be useful so that you can take action to change the outcome. And when it comes to things like the war, I mean, it's terrible, but, you know, we can't alter that outcome specifically. I mean, that we can do things, we can support, you know, the humanitarian aid and things like that, but this worrying about it will not help.
It won't
the same. No.
And the other thing that people don't always realize is that our gut instinct, our wisdom, whatever you want to call it, guides us in that moment. We don't need to practice for emergencies in our head. We don't need to practice what I will do if I have a panic attack. We don't need to practice what I will do if I get issues with my thyroid. Our body will guide us, and we will just know what to do in that moment. Because, again, it's a bit of a bold statement, but most people's suffering is coming from what's next, not right now. It's how much worse will this get? When will this go away? That's where the suffering exists. Often we manage really well with what we faced in the moment, because it's how we're built. We're built to do that.
Yeah. Well, it's been very interesting chat. I hope we'll have had a few tips to take away and understand that basically, you know, there isn't one single answer to everything, but how we judge ourselves, how we manage everything in the moment makes a big difference. And, you know, there are things that can be helped. Quite a lot of the time, hormone imbalances are contributing, but not the whole story. And
yes, always hope. Whatever someone's situation is, no matter how severe they might feel they are right now, that was me, there is always hope.
And self-care, looking after yourself, especially when you're a woman, because it's not a woman nature thing to look after yourself. That self-care and compassion is super important. Yeah. Oh, well, it's lovely. Thank you very much today. That was really good, and I hope people have found it useful.
Yeah, me
and
too.
National Women's Day to everybody who's joined.
All right.
All right. Bye bye, everybody.
Bye.
Good to see you.
Bye.
Bye.